My name is Amy Vance. I'm 29 years old, a petty officer in the United States Navy, and this is the story of how I finally broke free and reclaimed myself. The moment I was awarded the Commendation Medal, my father, Senator Sterling Vance, uttered the words that shattered my world. In front of his political colleagues, he said, "You are a political stain. I wish you had never been born." What they didn't expect was my answer, a response forged in military discipline, not despair, that silenced the entire room and changed my life forever. If you have ever been made to feel like a disappointment by the very people whose validation you craved most, then listen closely. This story is for you. Let me know where you're listening from, and hit like if you believe that honor is something we earn, not something we're given. The weight of the pearl brooch my mother pinned to my collar felt heavier than any body armor I would later wear. It was a cold, hard pressure against my 17-year-old throat. "Remember, Amy," she murmured, her reflection in the mirror as flawlessly composed as her voice. "Tonight, you are not my daughter. You are a political asset. Do not disappoint me." Disappointment was the family business, and I was its most consistent product. Outside, the manicured gardens of our estate in McLean, Virginia, were alive with the smooth, easy notes of a live jazz trio. The air smelled of magnolias and expensive perfume. This was a fundraiser for the Vance Foundation for Underprivileged Children, my mother's pet project, a masterpiece of public relations that did little for children and everything for my father's image. I stood beside him, a smiling doll in a dress that cost more than a month's rent for most people. The dull ache of a fresh bruise on my back, hidden beneath the silk, was a throbbing reminder of last night's discussion about my grades. "This is my pride and joy," Senator Sterling Vance boomed, his arm draping over my shoulder as he spoke to a major donor. "She'll be following the family into public service." His grip tightened, the pressure of his fingers a clear, silent warning. "Perform well." I smiled, the expression feeling like a mask hardening on my face. A few days later, the performance ended, and for a brief, beautiful moment, I thought I could finally be myself. An envelope arrived. Not just any envelope, it was thick, cream-colored, with the embossed seal of the Juilliard School. Inside was a letter offering me a full music scholarship, my dream. The one I'd nurtured in secret, practicing my violin for hours in the soundproofed basement. The only room in that house where I felt I could breathe. My hands were trembling as I walked into my father's library. It was his sanctuary, a fortress of dark mahogany and the scent of old leather and power. He was reading the Wall Street Journal, a glass of bourbon at his elbow. He didn't look up when I entered. "Father," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "I have something to show you." He lowered the paper, his eyes scanning me with the same detached assessment he gave his political opponents. I held out the letter. He took it, his movements unhurried. He read the first line, and then a smile, a cold, sharp thing far more terrifying than any shout, spread across his face. "Juilliard?" He let out a short, derisive laugh. "To be what? A fiddler in an orchestra? An entertainer for the rich?" He held the letter between his thumb and forefinger. Then, with a slow, deliberate cruelty that was meant to be witnessed, he began to tear it. The sound was quiet, a dry, rasping noise that echoed the tearing of my own heart. He didn't rip it in half. He tore it into small, precise pieces, letting them flutter down onto the Persian rug like dead leaves. "You will apply to Georgetown Law," he said, his voice flat, absolute. "That is not a suggestion. It is an order." He stood, straightened his tie, and walked out of the library, leaving me standing in the ruins of my future. I just stared at the confetti of my soul scattered at my feet. I didn't cry. Tears were a weakness he had long since beaten out of me. That's when my mother, Eleonora, appeared in the doorway. She wasn't there to comfort me. She was there to clean up. She knelt gracefully, her movements fluid and practiced, and began gathering the scraps of paper. "Your father is only thinking of your future, dear," she said, her voice as light and airy as the music from the party. "A lawyer can marry a judge, a senator even. Who does a violinist marry?" I looked at her, at this woman who gave me life only to help my father cage it. Her quiet complicity was the true architecture of my prison. The silence, the excuses, the pretense, they were the bars. A whisper escaped my lips, laced with a bitterness I didn't know I possessed. I'd rather marry no one than live a lie like you. The sound of the slap was sharp and absolute in the silent room. It snapped my head to the side, my cheeks stinging with a heat that was both familiar and, for the first time, final. She didn't say another word. She simply finished collecting the last piece of my dream and left me alone. That night, sleep was impossible. The sting on my cheek had faded, but a new fire was burning inside me. I sat in the dark, the blue glow of my laptop screen illuminating my face. I typed escape into the search bar, then deleted it. I typed purpose. Honor. My search led me to documentaries about the U.S. Navy. I watched hours of footage. I saw young women, their faces set with determination, standing on the decks of massive warships as they cut through the ocean. They weren't anyone's political asset. They didn't belong to a father or a husband. They belonged to something bigger than themselves, a code, a country, a commitment. Their eyes were unflinching, unafraid. In my father's library, among the countless books on law and politics, there was one biography I'd read over and over: Abraham Lincoln. I thought of his story, his rise from a log cabin, his relentless will forged in hardship. A quote from him that I had memorized echoed in my mind. Most folks are as happy as they make up their minds to be. Staring at the images of those sailors, I made up my mind. I saw discipline that built you up instead of tearing you down. I saw a brotherhood, a sisterhood built on earned trust, not inherited names. This was a world where honor was a verb, an action you took every day. It was no longer just an idea. It had become a plan, a way out. And as I sat there, the first hints of dawn striping the sky outside my gilded cage, a single question burned in my mind. A question that would propel me into a new life. Was there anywhere in this world where my worth wasn't a commodity to be traded? The plan born in the dead of night became my sole focus. The day after my 18th birthday, I withdrew a few $100s from my savings account, walked to the nearest Greyhound station, and bought a one-way ticket to Norfolk. The bus ride felt like a journey across an ocean. With every mile that separated me from McLean, the weight on my shoulders seemed to lighten. The recruiting office was exactly as I'd imagined, old, smelling faintly of stale coffee and pine sol, with motivational posters curling at the edges on the wood-paneled walls. The recruiting sergeant was a weathered, no-nonsense man with a thick neck and kind eyes. He looked at the McLean address on my driver's license and raised a single, skeptical eyebrow. But to his credit, he said nothing about it. He just leaned forward, his hands clasped on his desk. "Why do you want to join the Navy, Vance?" I met his gaze without flinching. "Because I want to serve something I can trust, Sergeant." He seemed to accept that. He slid the thick stack of papers across the desk. I read every line. And then, I picked up the cheap government issue pen. As the ballpoint pressed into the paper, I felt it. A final invisible chain snapping. It was the most important signature of my life, an act of rebellion and reclamation all in one. It was my declaration of independence. When I got home that evening, the house was quiet. Dinner was already on the table, perfectly seared filet mignon, asparagus with hollandaise sauce, a scene of domestic tranquility. I walked to the dining table, my father at its head, my mother at its foot, and said nothing. I simply placed the folded, government-sealed contract on the polished mahogany surface, right next to his plate. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Sterling put down his fork. He picked up the papers. As his eyes scanned the official United States Navy letterhead, his face, usually a carefully controlled mask of political calm, contorted. It was a slow, terrifying transformation from disbelief to pure, unadulterated rage. My mother was the first to break. She let out a shriek, a sound of genuine horror, as if she'd just witnessed a murder. "Are you insane, Amy?" she wailed, rising from her chair. "You're throwing your future away. You're destroying this family." My father remained silent. He just stood up, his face as cold and hard as granite, and jerked his head toward the library. It was a command I knew all too well. My mother rushed to me, grabbing my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Go apologize to him. Amy, please, tell him you'll take it back." I gently pried her fingers off my arm. "It's too late for that, Mother." The library doors closed behind us with a heavy final thud. This time, he didn't reach for his belt. This time, he used his hands. He wanted to feel me break. He wanted the satisfaction of my submission. He grabbed my arm and threw me against a bookshelf. Books tumbled to the floor. He struck me across the face, the force of the blow sending a shockwave through my skull. But something inside me had changed. As he hit me, I looked at him. I saw not a father, but a tyrant losing his grip. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I endured. With every blow that landed, a single verse echoed in the chambers of my heart. It was a line my grandmother, the only person who had ever shown me unconditional love, used to read to me from her worn-out Bible. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Whom shall I fear?" He hit me again. The words pulsed inside me. "Whom shall I fear?" Finally, his rage spent, he stumbled back, breathing heavily, his knuckles red. He looked exhausted, defeated. I used a nearby chair to pull myself up, my body screaming in protest. My lip was split, and I could taste the metallic tang of blood. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, leaving a crimson smear. And I spoke, my voice clear and steady, cutting through his heavy breathing. "This contract," I said, meeting his stunned gaze, "is the property of the federal government. If you attempt to interfere with it, you will be committing a felony. And I took a shaky breath, the fire in me burning away the pain. "I will be the first witness against you." He froze. Sterling Vance, the master legislator, the man who bent laws and systems to his will, was suddenly trapped by them. For the first time in his life, his immense power was utterly neutralized. He could call generals. He could call cabinet secretaries. But he could not make this document disappear without creating a political firestorm that would incinerate his career. The irony was devastating. My father, a powerful member of the Senate Armed Services Committee who gave fiery speeches about strengthening our military, was brought to his knees by the enlistment contract of his own daughter. I had used his system to defeat him. I looked into the eyes of the bully, now rendered impotent, a king without a kingdom. There was no more fear. There was only a vast empty space where it used to be. "Goodbye, Father," I said, the words feeling clean and final. "I'm going to serve my country." And then I turned my back on him. I walked out of that library, out of that house, leaving him standing there, a silent statue amid his expensive leather-bound law books. I didn't look back. I was finally, truly, free. I walked away from my father's house, a free woman. I stepped off the bus at Recruit Training Command, Great Lakes, Illinois, and became a nameless number. The January wind whipping off Lake Michigan was a physical assault. 1,000 tiny needles piercing my skin. It was the first of many shocks to the system. My long hair, once a point of pride for my mother, was sheared off in a matter of seconds, falling to the floor in a sad, lifeless heap. My designer clothes were replaced with a stiff, standard-issue uniform. Along with 100 other recruits, I was screamed at, broken down, stripped of every shred of individuality until we were nothing but a single, synchronized machine. For many of the girls crying silently in their bunks at night, this place was hell. For me, this structured chaos was a strange kind of sanctuary. Here, the screaming had a purpose. The rules were clear. And for the first time in my life, everyone was treated exactly the same. It didn't matter if you were a senator's daughter from Virginia or a farmer's daughter from Iowa. Your name didn't matter. Your past didn't matter. All that mattered was what you could do, right here, right now. The weeks of boot camp blurred into an endless cycle of exertion and exhaustion. Push-ups in freezing mud until my arms trembled uncontrollably. Long runs in the pre-dawn darkness as snow spit from a gray sky. Learning to field strip and reassemble my rifle blindfolded until my fingers were raw. and the scent of gun oil was permanently etched into my skin. I grew thin and hard, my body a collection of new bruises. But these bruises were different. They were not badges of shame. They were receipts for effort, proof that I was earning my place. During one particularly brutal obstacle course, the Weaver, they called it, my grip slipped on an icy log. I fell hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. Lying there in the slush, every muscle screaming, I thought, I can't do this. The thought was a traitorous whisper. But then, a voice cut through the haze of pain. Pain is temporary, Vance. Quitting lasts forever. It was Master Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thorne, a tall, imposing African-American man with eyes that seemed to see right through you. He was our lead instructor, a man who spoke in absolutes and radiated an authority that had nothing to do with wealth or politics. It was earned. His drill instructors often quoted the legendary football coach Vince Lombardi, "Fatigue makes cowards of us all." Master Chief Thorne embodied the opposite of that. He was courage personified. His words hit me harder than the fall. I gritted my teeth, found my feet, and hauled myself back onto the obstacle. I finished the course. Master Chief Thorne started to watch me. I could feel his gaze during drills, not with judgment, but with a quiet, intense observation. He wasn't looking at a debutante playing soldier. He was looking for something deeper. He found it during a shipboard firefighting simulation. It was a chaotic, smoke-filled hell designed to induce panic. While others flailed, I found a strange calm. I remembered the procedures, my voice cutting through the noise, guiding my small team through the dark, smoke-choked compartments to safety. That night, he called me aside. I stood at attention, bracing for a critique. He didn't praise me. He just looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You've got leadership potential, Vance," he said, his voice a low baritone. "Don't waste it." That was it. 10 words, delivered with no emotion, no ceremony. But to me, they were more valuable than any trophy, more affirming than any hollow compliment I had ever received. For the first time, someone saw not what I was supposed to be, but what I could be. They saw me. It was in that crucible, that shared experience of being broken down and rebuilt, that I found them. My first real friends. Isabella Izzy Flores, a tough, wisecracking girl from the Bronx who could find humor in a 10-mile run. And David Chen, a quiet computer genius from California whose calm demeanor hid a razor-sharp mind. He was the one who helped me memorize the 100-plus pages of Navy regulations. One evening, during our designated personal time, I was sitting alone in a corner of the barracks, cleaning my rifle, trying to scrub away the memories that clung to me like the winter damp. Izzy and David came over and sat on the floor beside me. They didn't ask what was wrong. They didn't pry. Izzy just broke her contraband Hershey bar in half and handed me a piece. David, trying to help, launched into the world's worst dad joke about a sailor walking into a bar. It was terrible. I couldn't help but let out a small laugh. In that simple moment, with the smell of chocolate and the echo of a bad joke hanging in the air, I felt a profound shift. I wasn't alone anymore. I was part of something. A team. A family that was being forged, not by blood, but by fire. You know, there are moments that redefine us. For me, it was that first, simple act of kindness from people who owed me nothing. It was the first time I felt like I truly belonged somewhere. If you've ever had a chosen family, friends who became your rock when your own family let you down, hit that like button. And in the comments, I'd love for you to just write one word that describes what that chosen family means to you. For me, that word would be salvation. What's yours? That small spark of connection I felt in the barracks that night, over a stolen chocolate bar and a bad joke, became the fire that warmed my entire world. After graduating from boot camp, the three of us, Izzy, David, and I, all received orders for A school at the same training command near Virginia Beach. We had made it. We were no longer recruits, but sailors. As our first Thanksgiving away from home approached, a familiar sense of dread began to creep in. I was already picturing myself alone in the barracks, the silence a stark reminder of the hollow festivities I had escaped. But a few days before the holiday, Master Chief Thorne, who had also been transferred to the same command as a senior instructor, found me after class. "Vance," he said in his usual direct manner, "my wife's making too much food. You, Flores, and Chen. Be at my house at 1500 on Thursday. That's an order." His house was a small, cozy home in a quiet Chicago suburb, filled with the incredible aroma of roasted chicken and freshly baked bread. His wife, a kind-faced nurse named Sarah, greeted me at the door not with a handshake, but with a warm, motherly hug that nearly brought me to tears. For the first time in my life, I sat at a dinner table where the only tension was who would get the last spoonful of mashed potatoes. There were no cutting remarks, no passive-aggressive critiques, just easy laughter and the simple comfort of shared stories. They asked about our hometowns. Izzy talked about the Bronx, David about the quiet streets of suburban Sacramento. When they turned to me, I hesitated. "And you, Amy? What's your family like?" Sarah asked gently. I looked around the table, at Master Chief Thorne carving the chicken, at his wife smiling, at Izzy and David arguing playfully over who got the last dinner roll. A feeling of profound certainty washed over me. "My family," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "is right here." Master Chief Thorne stopped carving, looked at me, and gave a slow, knowing nod. In his eyes, I saw an understanding that went beyond words. I was home. That trust, that sense of safety, allowed me to open up in ways I never thought possible. A few weeks later, Izzy found me sitting on my bunk, staring at an old, faded photograph I kept tucked in my wallet. It was a picture of a much younger me, maybe 6 or 7, a tiny violin tucked under my chin, a look of pure joy on my face. "You play?" Izzy asked, sitting beside me. I nodded, the lump forming in my throat. And for the first time, I told someone the whole story. I told her about Juilliard, about the scholarship, about the sound of the paper tearing in my father's hands. I spoke in a quiet, halting voice, half expecting her to say something like, "Oh, you poor thing." But Izzy wasn't the pitying type. She listened intently, her expression hardening. When I finished, she put a firm, steadying hand on my shoulder. "That son of a bitch," she said, her Bronx accent thick with indignation. "He has no idea what he lost, but the Navy does. We got you." Her words weren't sympathy. They were validation. A simple, powerful affirmation that healed a part of me I thought was broken forever. I was excelling in my technical training for signals intelligence, but I was still learning to deprogram a lifetime of fear. One afternoon, during a complex training exercise, I made a small mistake. It wasn't critical, but it caused a minor system glitch. My blood ran cold. My first instinct, drilled into me since childhood, was to hide it, to fix it before anyone noticed. But I was caught. Master Chief Thorne called me into his office. He shut the door, and I braced myself for the verbal lashing, or worse. He just sat behind his desk, his hands folded. "I'm disappointed, Vance," he began, his voice low and serious. I flinched. "Not because you made a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. I'm disappointed because you didn't report it immediately. What are you afraid of?" I looked down at my hands. "In my house," I mumbled, "making a mistake meant punishment." He let out a long, slow sigh. "This isn't your house. This is the Navy. Out here, hiding a mistake is what gets your shipmates killed. Integrity, Vance, it's everything. Do you understand?" He didn't yell. He didn't punish me. He taught me. He was showing me what a real father does. He builds you up. He doesn't tear you down. While reading one night, I came across a speech by General Douglas MacArthur, who spoke of duty, honor, country. I realized then that what my new family was showing me was a form of that duty, the duty to care for one another. On my birthday, I expected nothing. It had never been a day of real celebration, just another command performance. When I walked back to my room after a long day of classes, the lights were off. I flicked them on. Surprise! Izzy and David were standing there, a single cupcake with a lit candle sitting on my desk. They launched into the most off-key, tone-deaf rendition of Happy Birthday I had ever heard. It was beautiful. Their gift was a small rectangular case. I opened it. Inside, nestled in worn velvet, was a violin. It was old, clearly used, the wood scarred with age. "We found it at a pawn shop," David said sheepishly. "It's not much, but—" I couldn't speak. The tears I had held back for so long finally came. Not the hot, painful tears of my old life, but tears of overwhelming, heartbreaking gratitude. That night, in our cramped barracks room, I lifted the old violin to my shoulder. My fingers, now calloused from training, still remembered the notes. I played a soft, simple melody, the music I thought had been silenced forever. And I played it for them, for my family. Years passed. The quiet, uncertain girl who signed an enlistment contract became a woman. I poured myself into my work, finding a sense of purpose and clarity in the complex world of signals intelligence. The Navy became my life, my home, my true north. I rose through the ranks, earning the respect of my peers and superiors. I was Petty Officer First Class Amy Vance now. I had a name, and it was one I had built for myself. After a grueling 6-month deployment in the Persian Gulf, my team and I intercepted a critical piece of intelligence that thwarted a planned attack on a U.S. carrier strike group. It was the culmination of everything I'd learned, a moment of intense pressure where my training, my instincts, and my team's flawless execution all came together. I never did it for the glory. I did it because it was the mission. So, when my commanding officer informed me I'd been put in for the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal, I was genuinely shocked. It felt unreal. Master Chief Thorne, now a mentor and a constant presence in my life, was the one who presented me with the medal in a small, informal ceremony on base before the official one. As he pinned the ribbon bar on my uniform, he looked me in the eye. "You earned this, Amy," he said, using my first name, something he rarely did. "Don't you ever doubt that." The news of the commendation eventually filtered through the official military channels, and that's when the past came calling. It was an unknown number from a DC area code. I almost didn't answer, but I did. "Amy, darling, it's Mom." The voice was a ghost, syrupy sweet and chillingly familiar. It was Eleonora. My hand tightened on the phone. A memory flashed, unbidden. Her face, cold and impassive, after she had slapped me in the library. "Your father and I heard the news. Oh, we are just so incredibly proud of you," she chirped, the artificial brightness of her tone scraping against my ears like nails on a chalkboard. I was silent, stunned. The word proud felt alien coming from her lips. The only pride they'd ever shown was in the political asset I was supposed to become. "Proud," was all I could manage to say, my voice flat. She steamrolled right over my coldness, a tactic I knew well. "The official ceremony is in Washington, isn't it? That's just wonderful. Your father is already arranging a special family dinner to celebrate. A real hero in the family. He can't wait to see you." A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. I wasn't a fool. I knew what this was. My father was gearing up for his re-election campaign. A patriotic senator, a key member of the Armed Services Committee, seen publicly celebrating his decorated Navy hero daughter. It was a public relations goldmine. A perfect photo op to erase years of rumors about our fractured relationship. It was a move on a chessboard, and I was, once again, the pawn. I knew all of this. My mind, trained to see patterns and analyze threats, saw the trap as clearly as a flashing red light on a console. And yet, a tiny, treacherous part of me, the ghost of the little girl who just wanted her father's approval, whispered, "But what if it's different this time? What if he really is proud?" It was a stupid, dangerous hope, a weed I thought I had long since ripped out. But there it was, stubbornly pushing its way through the cracks in my carefully constructed defenses. I felt like I was betraying myself just by considering it. In my bunk that night, I found myself reading a book I kept with me, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. A line I had underlined seemed to mock me from the page. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. I had changed myself. Was I really going to let them drag me back into a situation I couldn't change? The next day, I told Izzy and David about the call. We were sitting in a small coffee shop off base, the smell of roasted beans a welcome comfort. Izzy, never one to mince words, snorted into her latte. "Don't be a sucker, Amy," she said bluntly. "It's a trap. He doesn't care about the medal. He cares about the votes that medal can get him." David, ever the cautious one, looked at me with concern. "Are you sure you're ready for that, to see them again?" Their words were like a splash of cold water, grounding me in reality. But it was Master Chief Thorne's counsel that truly centered me. I found him in his office, and after explaining the situation, I asked him what he thought I should do. He didn't give me an answer. He never did. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me, his gaze steady and unwavering. "The decision is yours, Petty Officer Vance. You're a grown woman. But I want you to remember who you are." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a quiet, powerful intensity. "You are a petty officer first class in the United States Navy. You have served your country with distinction. You have earned the respect of your peers. You built that. You did. Don't ever let anyone, I don't care if it's a stranger on the street or a United States senator, take that honor away from you." His words fortified me. He was right. The name on my uniform, Vance, might have been given to me. But the rank, the medals, the person I had become, that was all mine. I had forged it in fire. And I would not let the shadows of the past extinguish that flame. I made my decision. I would go. Not for them, but for me. I would face them, not as their daughter, but as myself. And this time, I would not be the one who broke. I walked into the private dining room at the Capitol Grill in D.C., feeling like a soldier entering a minefield. The air was thick with the scent of expensive steak and political ambition. I wore my service dress blue uniform, the dark fabric a shield, the ribbons on my chest a testament to a life they didn't know. My reflection in the polished wood panels was of a stranger, composed, disciplined, and ready. Sterling and Eleonora were already there, holding court with two other senators and their wives. They looked like the perfect American power couple. My father saw me, and his face lit up with a brilliant, false smile. He strode over and enveloped me in a stiff, theatrical hug. "Perform well," he whispered into my ear, his breath smelling of bourbon. For the next hour, I was the star of his one-man show. He regaled the table with a beautifully crafted fiction of our family life, a story of his unwavering support for my patriotic calling. He spoke of his pride, his voice booming with sincerity. I sat there, a silent, smiling prop in his production, my posture perfect, my expression neutral. I was an ocean of calm on the surface, but a storm was raging underneath. I could feel the tectonic plates of my life shifting, grinding towards a final, inevitable earthquake. Finally, the other guests departed, leaving a trail of polite goodbyes and empty wine glasses. The moment the door clicked shut, the performance ended. The masks dropped. It was Eleonora who fired the first shot, her voice dripping with thinly veiled disapproval. "You look so thin, Amy, and that tan." Senator Brighton's wife kept asking me why I would let my daughter suffer like this. My father waved a dismissive hand, swirling the last of the red wine in his glass. "That medal is all well and good," he said, his tone condescending, as if speaking to a child who had brought home a gold star sticker. "But it's time to end this little game. You've had your experience. I have a policy aide position waiting for you on my staff. You start Monday." They weren't asking. They were informing me of my future, a future where I would be tucked neatly back into my box, the decorated pawn on his political chessboard. The years of my service, my sacrifice, my entire life. It was just a game. An experience. I took a slow, deliberate breath, the one my instructors had taught me to take before entering a hostile situation. "It wasn't a game, Senator," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I am a sailor in the United States Navy, and I am proud of my service." The use of his title, not his name, was the spark. His control, so absolute for so long, finally shattered against the wall of my calm defiance. He couldn't command me. He couldn't hit me, not here. So he reached for the only weapon he had left, the one designed to annihilate my very soul. He stood up, raising his wineglass in a mock toast. The light caught the deep red of the liquid, and for a moment, it looked like a glass of blood. He stared directly at me, his eyes filled with a contempt so pure it was breathtaking. And then he said the words I told you in the beginning. The words that had been the unspoken truth of my entire childhood, now finally given a voice. You are a political stain, he said, his voice low and venomous. I wish you had never been born. The world stopped. The clatter of the restaurant outside faded to a dull roar. For one single, shattering second, I felt my heart break. It was a physical sensation, a crack spreading through my chest. The little girl inside me, the one who had never stopped hoping, finally died. And then, the sailor took over. The discipline, forged in fire and ice, rose up and took command. My spine straightened. My shoulders went back. I rose from my chair, not as a wounded child, but as an equal. I thought of Rosa Parks, of the immense power in the quiet refusal to be moved. I would not be moved from my honor. I looked my father in the eye. Senator, I said, and my voice was a revelation. It did not tremble. It was clear, resonant, and utterly devoid of fear. If my existence is a stain, then as of this moment, you are clean. I turned my head and met the horrified, gaping stare of my mother. And so are you, I added, my voice cutting the final chord. I reached up and squared the shoulders of my uniform jacket, a small, deliberate gesture of self-respect. Then I executed a perfect about-face and walked. I did not run. I did not stumble. I walked out of that room, my footsteps echoing in the stunned, suffocating silence I left behind. They had built my prison, and with their own words, they had just handed me the key. I walked out of that restaurant and never looked back. That was the moment I chose my own honor over their approval, forever. It was terrifying, and it was the most liberating moment of my life. If you've ever had to make a hard choice to protect your own peace and dignity, even if it meant walking away from someone you were supposed to love, please hit that like button to show some support for everyone who's been there. And in the comments, just type the words, I stand, if you believe that true strength is standing up for yourself, no matter the cost. I drove out of Washington, D.C. that night on pure adrenaline. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white, but my mind was eerily calm, like the eye of a hurricane. The city lights blurred into streaks in my rearview mirror as I headed south on I-95. I didn't drive to the empty hotel room I had booked. I drove toward the only place that felt like home. I drove to Naval Station Norfolk. It was well past midnight when I pulled into the deserted parking lot near the barracks. Under the orange glow of a single sodium lamp, I saw two figures waiting for me, leaning against Izzy's beat-up Honda Civic. It was her and David. It was as if they knew, somehow, that I wouldn't be okay, that I would need them. I killed the engine and just sat there for a moment, the silence of the car a stark contrast to the storm that had just ripped through my life. Izzy didn't wait. She walked over, opened my car door, and simply pulled me out and into a fierce, protective hug. David was right behind her, pressing a cold bottle of water into my hand. They didn't ask, "What happened?" They didn't need to. They just said, "We're here, we got you." And in the steady, silent embrace of my friends, I finally allowed myself to cry. But these weren't the tears of a victim. They were the tears of a survivor. A release of a lifetime of pain that I had finally, decisively, walked away from. The next morning, the counterattack began. My phone started buzzing relentlessly just after dawn. It was a coordinated assault. First, a text from Eleonora, dripping with false concern. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Your father was just under a lot of stress. Please call me." Then, a voicemail from Sterling himself, his voice cold and menacing. "You will regret embarrassing me like that. You have no idea what you've done." The whiplash between manipulative sweetness and outright threat was a familiar tactic. But this time, I wasn't playing their game. With David, my tech-savvy guardian angel, sitting beside me, I began systematically building my fortress. Operation Firewall, we called it. Step 1. Block their numbers. Delete their contacts. Step 2. Deactivate all social media accounts. Erase my digital footprint. Step 3. Create a new, secure email address. It was methodical, clinical. I remembered reading Gavin DeBecker's book, The Gift of Fear, where he explains how predators use contact to maintain control. I was severing all contact. But I knew that with a man like my father, a digital firewall wasn't enough. He was a United States senator. He had influence. He had resources. He could find me. So I did the one thing the old Amy would never have dared to do. I decided to use the system to fight the system. I requested a formal meeting with my command master chief and my division officer. I walked into that office not as a hurt daughter, but as Petty Officer First Class Vance. I stood at attention, and I gave my report. I detailed the events of the dinner. I provided the history of physical and psychological abuse, not with emotion, but with the cold, hard facts of a formal statement. I concluded by stating the current threat. My father is a powerful and vindictive man, I said, my voice steady. He sits on the Senate Armed Services Committee. I have a legitimate concern that he will abuse his position and his security clearance to access my military records, interfere with my career, or attempt to contact me against my will. I am reporting this as a potential threat to my personal security and my operational readiness. I wasn't asking for pity. I was reporting a security risk. My officers listened in complete silence, their expressions grim. Master Chief Thorne, who was also present, had heard a version of my past. But the full, unvarnished truth laid bare in that office seemed to solidify something in his eyes. When I was finished, he was the one who spoke. There's a mechanism for this, he said. It's called an MPO. A military protective order. It's a tool typically used in domestic disputes between service members. But Master Chief Thorne explained that it could also be issued to protect a service member from harassment and threats from a civilian, regardless of who that civilian was. Based on my sworn statement detailing a history of abuse and the current threats of harassment, my command took immediate action. Within 48 hours, a formal MPO was issued. The document was a shield made of paper and law. It legally prohibited Senator Sterling Vance and Eleanora Vance from contacting me in any way, phone, email, or third party. It forbade them from coming within 500 yards of me, my residence on base, or my place of work. Any attempt by the senator's office to officially request information about my service record or location would be flagged and denied, citing the order. When my divisional officer handed me my official copy, I held it in my hands and read the words. For the first time, I felt something I had never truly known. Safety. Real, institutional safety. My entire life, my father's power had been an absolute, terrifying force. But now I had found a system with its own power, the United States Navy, and it had just drawn a line in the sand and placed itself firmly on my side. The fortress was complete. The storm could rage outside, but it could no longer touch me. The military protective order was a fortress wall. But once the external threat was gone, I realized the ghosts were all inside. The adrenaline faded, leaving behind a hollow sort of quiet. I had won the war, but now I had to figure out how to live in the peace. So I did what sailors do. I went to sea. I volunteered for a 6-month deployment aboard the USS Roosevelt, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. For me, that gray ship was more than a mission. It was a monastery. Out on the vast, indifferent expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, the power and influence of Senator Sterling Vance meant nothing. The horizon was the only authority here. Life on a deployed destroyer is a relentless, unchanging rhythm. 12-hour watches, shared meals in the galley, endless drills. That rigid structure, which might feel suffocating to some, became my therapy. It gave me a framework to exist within, a predictable pattern that crowded out the chaotic memories. Standing watch on the bridge wing late at night, under a dome of brilliant stars untouched by city lights, I felt the smallness of my own story against the backdrop of eternity. The salt spray on my face felt like a baptism, washing away the residue of my old life. But you can't outrun what's inside your own head. Before I left, Master Chief Thorne had encouraged me to speak with someone from Fleet and Family Services. Even the strongest steel has stress fractures, Amy, he'd said. Doesn't make it weak. Makes it smart to get it checked out. The ship had a counselor on board, a calm, patient woman in her late 40s named Lieutenant Commander Evans. I made an appointment. In our first session, I was guarded. I talked about work stress and operational tempo. I was a sailor discussing the pressures of the job. She listened patiently, then gently steered the conversation. And how did you deal with pressure when you were younger, Petty Officer Vance? The question was so simple, yet it felt like a key turning in a lock I hadn't touched for years. The door creaked open, and for the first time, I talked about the library. I talked about the belt. I described the cold silence that followed the storms of his rage. She listened without judgment. Then she asked another simple question. What do you call that? I hesitated. The words I'd always used circled in my head. He was strict. He had a temper. It was just discipline. The excuses felt thin, pathetic out here in the open. He was hard on me, I said, the words feeling like a lie. She just waited. The silence in her small office was absolute, broken only by the low hum of the ship's ventilation. Finally, I looked her in the eye, and the real word, the true word, clawed its way out of my throat. Abuse, I whispered. It was abuse. Saying it aloud was like pulling a poisoned arrow from my own heart. It hurt, but for the first time, I could finally see the wound for what it was. Our sessions continued throughout the deployment, sometimes in person, sometimes via secure video call when our schedules conflicted. LCDR Evans introduced me to the work of Brené Brown, a researcher whose books I started devouring on my tablet. Brown wrote that vulnerability wasn't weakness, but our most accurate measure of courage. That idea became a lifeline. It gave me the courage to be vulnerable with myself. I began to identify the toxic scripts my parents had programmed into my brain. You are not good enough. You are a burden. Your worth is conditional. It was hard, painful work. Some days I felt emotionally exhausted, like I'd run a marathon in my own mind. But I wasn't alone. Izzy and David, deployed on different ships in the same strike group, were my constant support. We'd have weekly video calls where we'd complain about our chiefs, share stupid memes, or just watch the same movie together from 1,000 miles apart. Their unwavering friendship was the anchor that kept me steady through the emotional storms. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, things began to change. I started to laugh more easily. A real, genuine laugh, not the polite, hollow sound from my past. I joined the ship's volleyball team, my competitive streak finally finding a healthy outlet. I taught David the basic chords on a guitar he'd brought with him during a port visit in Rota, Spain. I even conspired with Izzy to play harmless pranks on a notoriously grumpy officer in her command via intership email. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living. One hot, hazy afternoon, our ship was making a slow transit through the Suez Canal. I was off watch, standing on the deck, feeling the warm, dry desert wind on my face. The sun was bright, the sky a vast, pale blue. I watched the sandy shores of Egypt slip by, a landscape as ancient as time itself. And in that moment of profound peace, I realized something startling. I hadn't thought about my parents in days. Not in anger, not in sadness, not at all. Their ghosts were no longer haunting my every waking moment. The space they had occupied in my head for so long was finally, blessedly, empty. And it was being filled with new things. The camaraderie of my shipmates, the satisfaction of my work, the simple, profound joy of feeling the sun on my skin. I was healing. 2 years passed in productive, meaningful silence. I was stationed at the Pentagon, a petty officer first class working in a joint service intelligence unit. My life was ordered, my purpose clear. The fortress I had built was holding strong. And then, the outside world intruded once more. It began subtly. A lawyer from a prestigious DC firm approached me after work, claiming to represent a third party. The approach was professional, indirect, designed to circumvent the military protective order. He carried a message from Senator Sterling Vance's chief of staff. My father had just officially announced his candidacy for President of the United States. The lawyer presented the offer. It was a masterpiece of political maneuvering, framed as a request for familial reconciliation in the national interest. They wanted me, the decorated military hero, to appear at a few key campaign events, a photo op, a symbol of unity. It was his final, most desperate attempt to sanitize his image and neutralize me as a political liability. He was using the flag to hide his sins. In military strategy, there's a core principle: never fight on the enemy's terrain. Always choose the battlefield. The old Amy would have refused, run, or hidden. The new Amy saw an opportunity. This would be the final engagement, and it would be on my terms. I agreed to the meeting, but only under a strict, non-negotiable set of conditions. 1. The meeting would take place at the grounds, the coffee shop inside the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Triangle, Virginia. It was a place of honor, of sacrifice. It was my turf. 2. I would be in uniform. 3. It would be just the two of us. No lawyers, no aides, no Eleonora. Desperate for the image he needed, he agreed to all of it. I arrived early and chose a table with a clear view of the entrance, the soaring glass atrium of the museum visible behind me. I sat with my back perfectly straight, my hands resting calmly on the table. When Sterling Vance walked in, he wasn't meeting his estranged daughter. He was walking into a debriefing with a superior officer. He looked older, the campaign trail already etching new lines of strain around his eyes. He tried for a warm smile, but it didn't reach them. He began with the speech his handlers had clearly written for him. It was a beautiful monologue about regret, the pressures of public life, and the importance of family as the bedrock of America. He spoke of his love for this country, and by extension, his love for me, its loyal servant. I let him finish. I took a slow sip of my black coffee and placed the cup back on the saucer with a quiet click that seemed to echo in the space between us. I didn't come here to listen to a campaign speech about America, I said, my voice low and even, devoid of any emotion. And I don't need your apology. It's worthless to me. He looked taken aback, his prepared script now useless. I leaned forward slightly, my eyes locked on his. But I will consider appearing with you. I will consider giving you the image you so desperately need. On one condition. I let the silence hang in the air, forcing him to ask. What is it? He said, his voice tight. You have to acknowledge what you did, I said. Not to the public, not to God. To me. Right here, right now. I want you to say the words, Senator. Say, I hit you. I abused you. The air in the cafe seemed to crystallize. The casual chatter from other tables faded into a distant hum. Sterling Vance, the silver-tongued orator who could hold a stadium of thousands captive with his voice, was rendered utterly speechless. The blood drained from his face. To say those words, even in this quiet cafe, would be to admit the truth of who he was. It would shatter the pristine marble edifice of the man he had constructed for the world, for himself. His identity was built on a lie, and I was asking him to take a sledgehammer to its foundation. He stammered. Amy, I was a father. It was a different time. I was strict. He tried to reframe it, to soften it, to negotiate with the truth. But I offered him nothing. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I just sat there, my gaze unwavering, my silence a weapon more powerful than any speech he had ever given. My silence was the truth, and it was demanding to be acknowledged. He faltered, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape route. He looked at my uniform, at the ribbons on my chest, at the woman I had become in spite of him. And in his eyes I saw it all. The panic, the shame, and finally, the pathetic flicker of a coward. He couldn't do it. He could command senates, pass laws, and rally nations. But he could not summon the courage to speak a few simple, honest words. In that deafening silence, I had my answer. The war was over. I had won. Not by making him confess, but by forcing him to live with the fact that he was too weak to. His silence was his confession. I stood up, my chair making no sound on the polished floor. I didn't need to say anything else. I had stripped him of his power, leaving him alone with his own cowardice. That was a prison far more permanent than any I'd ever known. I stood up from the cafe table, the scrape of the chair legs against the stone floor, the only sound in the sudden vacuum between us. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't offer a final, cutting remark. There was nothing left to say. His silence had said it all. I simply gave a short, decisive nod. Not a nod of agreement, but of finality. A full stop at the end of a long, painful sentence. With the discipline years of service had ingrained in me, I squared my shoulders, adjusted my uniform jacket, and turned my back on the man who was now just a ghost in a suit. I walked away, my footsteps measured and sure on the museum floor. I left him sitting alone with the wreckage of his own cowardice, a self-imposed prison from which he could never escape. His silence had been the only confession I ever needed. Stepping out from the hallowed halls of the museum and into the crisp Virginia air, I took a deep, cleansing breath. It felt like the first true breath of my life, untainted by fear or the desperate need for approval. The air was clean, fresh, and filled with the promise of a future that was entirely, irrevocably my own. In that quiet moment, I understood the nature of my victory. I hadn't won by defeating him. I'd won by forcing him to defeat himself. I didn't need to tear him down. His own weakness had done it for me. In the years that followed, the world seemed to render its own verdict. Sterling Vance's presidential campaign, built on a foundation of carefully curated images and hollow rhetoric, imploded spectacularly. A series of unrelated financial scandals and political missteps revealed the rot beneath the polished veneer. His political star didn't just fade, it crashed and burned, his name eventually becoming a footnote in the annals of ambition, a cautionary tale whispered in D.C. circles. He became, in the end, irrelevant. My life, however, moved in the opposite direction, charting a course toward a brighter horizon. I didn't just survive, I thrived. With the ghosts of the past finally laid to rest, I poured all my energy, my discipline, and my newfound peace into my sailors and my service. I made Chief Petty Officer, a milestone that brought tears to my eyes, then Senior Chief. And eventually, after years of dedicated leadership and unwavering commitment, I was selected for the Command Master Chief program, the highest and most respected enlisted rank in the United States Navy. I had become the leader, the mentor, the unwavering presence that Marcus Thorne had first seen in me all those years ago in the Illinois snow. My reputation preceded me. Master Chief Vance. Strict, but fair. Unflappable in a crisis. And fiercely, almost terrifyingly, protective of her people. The sailors under my charge knew I demanded nothing less than their absolute best, but they also knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that I would walk through fire for any one of them. My legacy wasn't going to be a law passed in the Senate or a name engraved on a university building. My legacy was living and breathing in the young sailors I mentored, the leaders I helped shape, the men and women to whom I taught the true meaning of honor, the kind that is forged in your actions, not gifted by your bloodline. The most profound moments, the ones that affirmed my new life, were always the quiet ones. One afternoon, a young seaman, barely 19 and fresh out of boot camp, knocked hesitantly on my open office door. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her shoulders slumped with the combined weight of profound homesickness and the immense pressure of her new, demanding life. She stood at a brittle parade rest before my desk and told me in a choked, wavering voice that her family didn't support her decision to join the Navy. They called her every night, begging her to quit, telling her she had thrown her life away for nothing. I didn't offer her empty platitudes or tell her to suck it up. I stood, walked around my desk, and pulled up a chair to sit beside her, not as her master chief, but as a fellow sailor, eye to eye. I just listened, letting her pour out all her fear and doubt. And when she was done, I told her a very short, unvarnished version of my own story. Family isn't always the one you're born into, I said softly, my voice filled with a certainty forged in fire. Sometimes it's the people standing watch with you in the middle of the night when the whole world is asleep. It's the one who shares their last cup of coffee with you during a 16-hour shift. It's the shipmates who have your back when the sea gets rough and the mission gets hard. Go find your family out there, sailor. They're waiting for you. And until you do, know that you're part of mine. In her eyes, I saw a flicker of the same hope that had saved me. In that moment, by offering the very understanding I had so desperately craved as a young woman, I felt the final piece of my own healing click into place. The circle was complete. Which brings me to now. My story ends where my new life truly began. At sea. But I'm no longer on a small destroyer, learning the ropes. I'm standing on the flight deck of the USS Gerald R. Ford, the most advanced aircraft carrier in the world, a 4.5-acre sovereign territory of the United States, a floating city forged of American steel and powered by nuclear fire. It is a symbol of the future, of strength, of endless possibility. The sun is just beginning to rise over the horizon, painting the clouds in impossible shades of orange, pink, and purple. The early morning wind is cool and clean, whipping through my short hair, tasting of salt and freedom. Below me, the massive ship hums with the contained power of thousands of sailors, all ready to meet the day. I look out at the endless expanse of the ocean, at the clean, perfect line where the sea meets the sky. I'm no longer the senator's daughter. I'm no longer a victim. I'm no longer a political stain. I'm Master Chief Vance of the United States Navy. My home is the sea. My family is the crew of this mighty warship. My name is my own. There's a poem by William Ernest Henley called Invictus that I read often. Its final lines have become my creed, the very compass of my soul. It goes, I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. And as the first brilliant rays of sunlight break across the water, igniting the waves in a flash of gold, I feel a profound and unshakable peace. And that's my story. Thank you for listening. My journey from that gilded cage to the deck of this carrier taught me one vital lesson. Our true value is never determined by the people who refuse to see it. It's forged in the choices we make when we're tested and in the family we choose to build. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight to become the captain of your own soul, please know that you are not alone. This channel is dedicated to sharing more stories of resilience and the power of the human spirit. By subscribing and turning on notifications, you're not just following a channel. You're joining a crew that believes we can all find our own dawn. Be well and stand tall. Ship of my life is steady, on course, and I am at the helm, steering toward the light.